The sea outside the Spencer Beach house shimmered in deceptive calm, waves folding against the sand as if the world itself wanted to lull everyone into forgetting. But peace, in this world, was never more than an illusion, a fragile disguise for the chaos waiting beneath. Will stood on the deck with his hands braced against the railing, the scent of salt and sun mixed with the weight of everything he was trying to contain. Inside, laughter sometimes echoed, Electra's voice, light and warm, trying to make this place feel like home, but even that sound carried tension now. The walls remembered too much. Every night, when the ocean turned dark, Will could still hear Luna's voice in his head, the ghost of what had happened that night he tried so hard to erase. Luna, locked behind the cold steel bars of her cell, had not forgotten. She refused to. In the quiet hours after lights out, she would sit by the small, barred window and whisper his name to herself, not as a plea, but as a promise. She had lost her freedom, her dignity, her future, but she would not lose Will. That, she swore. The other inmates called her the Quiet Storm because she never raised her voice, yet every look, every word, carried fire. Beneath her calm exterior was a ferocity that frightened even the guards. They didn't know what drove her, but she did. Love, obsession, revenge, she no longer knew the difference. To Luna, they had all merged into one single truth. Will Spencer had changed her life, and whether she rose or fell, she would drag him into that fate with her. Outside, the world had already begun to unravel. The Forresters and Spencers had turned on each other, alliances shifting like sand. Ridge and Steffi saw Luna as a stain on their legacy, a manipulator who had brought shame to both families through scandal and deceit. They wanted her out of sight, out of mind, locked away forever. Brooke, ever the voice of mercy, argued that the baby Luna carried was innocent, that punishing the mother too harshly would destroy more than one life. Even Hope, whose empathy once seemed endless, began to doubt. Each conversation ended in anger, with old wounds reopened and family dinners turning into battlefields. In the midst of it all, Electra tried to hold on to her composure. Moving into the beach house had seemed like a new beginning, a symbol of unity and strength. Bill had offered it to them as a sanctuary, a place where they could build something real, far from gossip and scrutiny. For a while she believed it. She rearranged furniture, filled the kitchen with flowers, and pretended the ocean's rhythm could drown out the whispers. But then came the letters. The first arrived folded neatly inside an unmarked envelope. No address, no sender, only her name written in neat, deliberate strokes. Inside, a single photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, showed Will entering Luna's apartment the night everything changed. There was no timestamp, no explanation, but the implication was enough to twist Electra's stomach into knots. She hid it for 2 days, convincing herself it was a cruel prank, that someone was trying to destroy what little happiness they had. But then another envelope came, and another. The second held words instead of images, a note scrawled in black ink. You don't know the truth. He never told you everything about that night. Electra's hands shook as she read it, her breath catching on every word. When Will returned home that evening, sunburned from the surf and smiling like nothing had changed, she forced a smile of her own, said nothing, and tucked the note into the drawer beside their bed. But her silence became poison. She began to watch him differently. Every pause in his speech, every deflection, every late-night phone call. Jealousy crept in, not in wild bursts but in quiet, gnawing waves. At first, she told herself she was being foolish, that Luna was gone and nothing could reach them here. But when the third envelope arrived, containing a single ultrasound photo marked, he should have been there, Electra's restraint broke. She confronted Will in the middle of the night, her voice trembling more from hurt than fury. Will didn't deny that he had been there that night. He couldn't. But his version of events was fragmented, half swallowed by guilt. He told her it wasn't what it looked like, that Luna had called him in despair, that he had only wanted to help. He insisted he had left before anything happened. Yet even as he spoke, his voice faltered at the edges, betraying the possibility that something more had occurred, something he couldn't bear to confess. Electra felt the ground slipping beneath her. From that moment on, the beach house ceased to be a home. It became a beautiful prison. The sea outside, once their refuge, now sounded like accusation. Endless, relentless. Bill tried to mediate, offering fatherly advice that came out more like warnings. He told Will that some ghosts didn't stay buried, that love required honesty before it required forgiveness. But Will was too proud, too afraid of losing everything, to admit that he still thought about Luna, about the night that destroyed them both. Inside her cell, Luna received news through whispers and smuggled messages. She heard that Electra and Will were struggling, that her letters had found their mark. She smiled then, not out of malice, but something darker and sadder. It wasn't enough to ruin them. She wanted him to face what he had done, to remember her not as a mistake, but as a wound that never healed. Her lawyer begged her to let go, to cooperate, to show remorse, but Luna's eyes burned with conviction. "They think I'm gone," she murmured. "But I'm still here." And she was right. Her presence seeped through every crack in Will's carefully constructed life. The tabloids reignited the scandal with headlines that refused to fade. Luna's silent revenge, one read. The Spencer heir's secret night. Another screamed. Reporters camped outside the beach house, drones hovered over the deck, and the whispers turned into open judgment. Electra, humiliated and exhausted, withdrew from the world entirely. She deleted her social media, avoided Forrester events, and spent her days wandering through empty rooms, wondering when love had become a battlefield. For Will, the breaking point came not from the media, but from his own reflection. One evening, he stood before the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back, the tired eyes, the hollow expression, the constant tension in his jaw. He thought of his father, Bill, who had spent years mistaking power for redemption, and realized with dread that he was becoming the same. He wanted to protect Electra, but he also wanted to protect Luna's child, if it truly was his. The idea haunted him. He couldn't abandon a child who might carry his blood, but every step he took toward helping Luna felt like betrayal to Electra. He tried to visit Luna once, without telling anyone. He thought maybe seeing her would bring closure, maybe even forgiveness. But the moment she walked into the visitation room, wearing prison beige, her hair pulled back, eyes sharper than ever, he knew there would be no closure. Luna didn't beg. She didn't cry. She looked at him as though she had already imagined this scene 100 times. "You think you can forget?" she asked quietly. "You think you can erase me?" Her words cut through him like glass. When he left that day, he was shaking. Afterward, everything deteriorated faster. Electra found out about the visit from a tabloid leak, a photograph of Will entering the correctional facility at night, captioned, "A man torn between two women." That headline alone shattered whatever remained of her trust. When she confronted him this time, her tears had turned to rage. She accused him of lying, of betraying her, of caring more about his past than their future. Will tried to explain, but his words only made it worse. "You don't understand," he said. "It's not about her. It's about doing what's right." But to Electra, it all sounded like excuses. The rift between them became unbridgeable. Will began sleeping on the couch, unable to bear the silence of their shared bed. He still loved Electra, but guilt clung to him like a second skin. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Luna's face, heard her voice repeating that same haunting vow, "I will never let you go." Meanwhile, Luna's influence extended beyond letters. From prison, she managed to orchestrate a campaign of emotional warfare, messages sent through intermediaries, hints dropped to the press, a quiet manipulation of public sympathy. Soon, opinion began to shift. People started questioning whether Luna had been wronged, whether the system had punished her unfairly because of her gender, her reputation, her connection to the Forresters. Petitions circulated demanding her release, pending review. Hope, though cautious, began to wonder if mercy was possible. Brooke warned her daughter to stay out of it, but Hope's empathy was stronger than her restraint. She visited Luna herself, and what she saw changed everything. Luna was persuasive, even in chains. She spoke of love, of betrayal, of being cast aside when she was most vulnerable. She didn't admit guilt, but she didn't deny pain. Hope left the prison confused but shaken, and her quiet support for Luna's appeal reignited the family divide. Brooke accused her of naivete, Steffi called it betrayal, and once again, old resentment surfaced. When news reached Will that Luna's sentence might be reduced, he felt the ground tilt again. He wanted to believe it was justice, but part of him knew it would only bring more turmoil. If Luna returned, what would become of Elektra? What would become of the fragile life he was still trying to salvage? He began to dream of escape, of leaving Los Angeles, of disappearing somewhere the past couldn't reach. But the past had already carved itself into his name. The night the final letter arrived, the ocean was wild, waves slamming against the rocks like fists. The envelope was soaked through by rain when Will found it at the door. Inside was a photograph of Luna in her cell, smiling faintly, and beneath it, 5 words written in the same deliberate hand. You can't bury the truth. Something inside him broke. He knew she was right. The truth wasn't just about what happened that night. It was about everything that had followed. The lies, the silence, the cowardice. He had let guilt dictate his choices until it destroyed everything he loved. That night, Will sat at his desk and wrote 2 letters, one to Luna, one to Elektra. In Luna's, he told her the truth she wanted, that he had loved her once, that part of him always would, but that love could not excuse what they had become. In Elektra's, he confessed everything, not just the night of the scandal, but every fear and weakness since. He wrote until dawn, not knowing if either woman would forgive him, but certain that if he stayed silent any longer, he would lose himself completely. When morning came, the sun rose over the sea as if nothing had happened. But inside the beach house, something had changed. The illusion of peace was gone, replaced by a strange clarity. Elektra read his letter in silence, tears falling onto the page, unsure whether she felt pity or release. So this is his redemption, she murmured, folding the paper with care. Then let him live with it. The scandal would fade eventually, as all things did in Los Angeles. The public would move on to another tragedy, another love affair. But for Will Spencer, the choice he faced remained eternal, between the woman who represented his future and the one who embodied his past, between the man he wanted to become and the man he feared he already was. Whether he rose or fell would depend not on the women who loved him, but on whether he could finally forgive himself. And somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of the waves, Luna's vow still lingered, carried by the wind. I will never let you go. It was both a curse and a truth, because in the end, no one in this story could ever truly escape what bound them together: love, guilt, and the unrelenting pull of memory. There was a quiet unease settling over Los Angeles that week, the kind of tension that no one could quite name, but everyone could feel. In the polished glass offices of Forrester Creations, amidst silk fabrics and photo shoots, Steffi Forrester Finnegan found herself wrestling with something far deeper than fashion or business. Her mind kept circling back to her mother, Taylor Hayes, and the strange mixture of hope and dread she felt every time her name came up. It began innocently enough, with a few questions, light, playful, the kind a daughter might ask out of affection rather than suspicion. But the more Steffi listened to Taylor's hesitant answers, the more she began to sense that something in her mother's life had shifted. There was a new glow about her, a nervous warmth, and though Taylor tried to disguise it, Steffi recognized the signs. Her mother was falling in love again. For most people, that might have been simple cause for joy. But Taylor's heart had never known simplicity. Every relationship she had ever dared to believe in had come with a cost, one paid in heartbreak, compromise, or guilt. Steffi wanted to be happy for her, yet she had learned from experience that love, in their family, was rarely a gift, it was a test. The mystery deepened when Taylor refused to name the man. She brushed off Steffi's questions with laughter, then silence, then an evasive change of subject that only made her daughter more determined to know the truth. And when Steffi finally began to put the clues together, the lingering glances, the subtle mentions, the way Taylor's voice softened whenever she said his name, it became clear. The man was Deacon Sharp. The revelation struck Steffi with the force of a silent earthquake. Deacon was not just anyone. He was a man who lived perpetually at the border between redemption and ruin. A man who had once tangled himself in Brooke Logan's chaos, who had married the most dangerous woman in Los Angeles, Sheila Carter, and somehow survived. For Steffi, that name alone was enough to darken her mother's new hope. Sheila was not a ghost of the past. She was a living, breathing threat, one who had haunted their family's peace for years. And now Taylor, in all her warmth and idealism, was walking straight back into her orbit. Still, Steffi hesitated. She knew her mother's loneliness, the ache of giving everything to her children, her patients, her causes, and never quite finding someone to give back. Taylor had always been a healer, even when she herself was the one bleeding. Maybe Deacon saw that in her, the same way so many others had. Maybe this time, love could mean something different. But Steffi couldn't silence the quiet alarm inside her. Every instinct as a daughter told her that this path could only end in pain. When Steffi finally confronted Taylor, it wasn't with anger, but with concern. The conversation began gently, but beneath her measured words was an unspoken urgency. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked, her tone light, her smile curious. Taylor paused too long before answering. That pause told Steffi everything. She leaned back, folding her arms, her eyes searching her mother's face for confirmation. Taylor, ever the psychologist, deflected with practiced ease, insisting that her focus was on work, on wellness, on her patients. But even she couldn't hide the faint tremor in her voice when she mentioned Deacon's name in passing. That tremor was enough. After that, Steffi spent hours alone, replaying every word. The logic of it unraveled easily. Deacon was one of Taylor's patients, already a breach of boundaries, and more importantly, he was Sheila's husband. No matter what he felt, no matter what he promised, his life was tied to the most dangerous woman any of them had ever known. The very thought made Steffi's stomach tighten. Hadn't they all spent years trying to protect themselves from Sheila's manipulations? Hadn't Taylor nearly lost her life because of her before? It didn't matter that Deacon claimed to be finished with Sheila. Men like him always believed they were in control until it was too late. And yet, in quieter moments, Steffi wondered if she was being too harsh. She had seen the way Taylor smiled when Deacon was mentioned, the small, involuntary lift of her lips that hadn't appeared in years. Her mother deserved to be seen, to be loved not as the family's moral compass, but as a woman with her own heart. Maybe Deacon, for all his flaws, understood her in a way no one else could. Both of them had been drawn to chaos, both had fought for redemption, and both had known what it was to be misunderstood. There was something undeniably human about that connection. But human didn't mean safe. As days passed, Taylor's connection with Deacon only deepened. They shared quiet dinners, conversations that wandered from philosophy to regret, laughter that loosened the weight of years. Taylor told herself it was harmless, companionship between two people who had made peace with their pasts. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. The way Deacon looked at her wasn't clinical, it was intimate, hungry, protective. She felt it every time his hand brushed hers, every time he called her by name with a tenderness she hadn't heard in years. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. She tried to resist, reminding herself of all the reasons she shouldn't feel this way, but resistance only made the longing stronger. When Steffi discovered that her mother had been meeting Deacon in secret, the worry that had been simmering beneath her calm exterior boiled over into fear. She didn't confront Taylor immediately. Instead, she went to the only person who might understand the stakes, Finn. Her husband listened quietly as she poured out everything, the secrecy, the risk, the shadow of Sheila. Finn's expression darkened at the mention of his biological mother. He knew better than anyone what Sheila was capable of. If Taylor became her new target, there would be no predicting what might happen. Be careful, he told Steffi softly. This isn't just about love. It's about survival. The next time mother and daughter spoke, Steffi could no longer hold back. She waited until they were alone in the family living room, the air between them heavy with unspoken truths. Taylor, sensing what was coming, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but Steffi was relentless. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. Instead, she spoke with the quiet, unwavering tone of someone who loved too fiercely to stay silent. She told Taylor she knew, that she understood, that she even believed Deacon might have changed, but that none of it mattered if Sheila was still in the picture. For a moment, Taylor's defenses crumbled. She admitted what Steffi already knew, that her feelings for Deacon were real, that she had meant for it to happen, that she thought she could control it. But love was never something Taylor could control. Steffi listened, torn between empathy and dread. Finally, she took her mother's hand and, with a trembling voice, spoke the 5 words that had been burning in her mind since the beginning. Be careful with Sheila, Mom. Those 5 words carried the weight of everything Steffi couldn't bear to say out loud. That love could be fatal, that happiness could invite danger, that history had a cruel way of repeating itself. Taylor nodded, promising she understood, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She was already too deep to walk away. From that moment, Steffi watched helplessly as her mother walked the fine line between healing and destruction. Deacon, for his part, seemed genuinely devoted to Taylor. He spoke about starting over, about proving that he was more than the mistakes of his past. And maybe he believed it. But redemption in their world always came at a price, and no one paid that price more dearly than the Forresters. When Sheila eventually learned of the growing closeness between her husband and the woman she once called a friend, the storm everyone feared finally broke. Sheila's reaction was as unpredictable as it was inevitable. To her, Taylor's connection with Deacon wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. In her mind, Taylor had taken everything: her son's trust, her redemption, and now her husband's affection. The calls began first, silent at night, then filled with venomous threats. Taylor tried to brush them off, but Steffi could see the fear etched behind her mother's composed expression. It was happening again, the cycle that never seemed to end. And yet, even under that cloud of danger, Taylor refused to let go of Deacon. There was something in her that clung to the belief that love could save even the most broken among them. Maybe she saw herself in him. Maybe she wanted to prove that even darkness could be transformed. But the cost of that belief grew heavier each day. Deacon, caught between 2 women, one who represented his past and one who symbolized his possible redemption, found himself trapped in an emotional war he could not win. For Steffi, the struggle became unbearable. She wanted to protect her mother, to shield her from the inevitable fallout, but she also understood that love, once it takes root, cannot be reasoned away. Watching Taylor and Deacon together was like watching a flame dance too close to dry wood. Beautiful, warm, and doomed to spark disaster. Her warnings became quieter, tinged with sorrow instead of frustration. You deserve happiness, she told her mother one evening, but not if it destroys you. Taylor smiled faintly, her eyes distant. Maybe destruction isn't the end, she murmured. Maybe it's how we begin again. Steffi didn't argue. She knew there was no changing her mother's